Hey fellow tankers, it's Mobius Y here once again with another World of Tanks Xbox video in the Road to the T110E4 series. Here in the 4th episode, we're taking a look at the Tier 8 US tank destroyer, the T28 Prototype. So, disclaimer, I did not like this tank. So if there's some cursing, you'll have to forgive me, because I did not like this tank. I did not like it quite a lot. The grind for me on this tank took a lot longer than it really should have, to be totally honest. And I played it fully upgraded as soon as I got it, as I used free XP to get the top package, and it still took me what felt like forever to get the 170,000 XP for the T30. So, what's good about the T28 Prototype? Well, looking at paper statistics, there's a couple things that are okay about it. The final gun on the T28 Prototype sports decent alpha at 400 with pretty good penetration at 248. That's pretty good for Tier 8. That's very good for Tier 8, as a matter of fact, as the average is anywhere between 170 to 190. Its frontal armor profile is not necessarily good, but it can be counted on in those troll moments when you really need it to work for you. And this tank sports 10 degrees of gun depression, or at least so it does on paper. We'll cover that a little bit later, because I really want to show you how false that is. But the negatives of this tank vastly outweigh the positives, in my personal opinion. This tank is a tank of extremes. You will have bad games simply because your team absolutely steamrolled the opposition, and you had no chance to get to the fight. Why is that? This thing moves 18 kilometers an hour. That's going forwards. Backwards, it's even worse. It's only like 7. Going backwards. It'll be a bit faster going down hills and such, but it's 18 kilometers an hour going forwards, and it's 7 going backwards on average. So if you decide to go down the wrong flank in this tank, you have no option of turning around to support your teammates who could be getting overwhelmed, or to try and actually get some damage in before your team steamrolls them, because it's just way too slow. Speed absolutely kills versatility. A lack of speed, I should say, absolutely kills versatility. And versatility in this game, in my personal opinion, is a godsend. That's part of the reason why I play so many medium tanks. This thing loses the versatility of the T25-2 by a long shot. So, honestly, you have to get quite lucky to have a pretty damn good game. Either your armor is just working way better than can be expected, or you have a crap load of idiotic enemy teammates that decided to basically just drive in front of you and let you shoot the crap out of them. That tended to happen most of the time. It's a very small niche where this tank absolutely excels all the time, and I found that it's when this tank is top tier and in an urban environment where you can simply just point your front towards the enemy or enemies that you intend to just bully into oblivion, and they have virtually no hope of penetrating you unless they use premium ammunition, or they have a super high penetration gun and nowhere to shoot you, basically. Pretty much the only Tier 8 that will reliably penetrate the T28 Proto's frontal armor profile is an ISU 152, because that thing gets 286 penetration with the BL-10. Everything else will have difficulty if they don't know where to shoot you. And we'll cover more of the armor profile later. But enough of that. Let's take a look at the packages on the T28 Prototype. The grind on the T28 Prototype is also absolutely awful, especially if you've not gone down the other US tank destroyer line. And I'll explain why in a second. So stock, the T28 Prototype gets the 90mm AT gun T15E2. This is the top gun on the T25-2, so really garbage starting off at Tier 8. But the first upgrade, you get a better 105mm AT gun T5E1. Better alpha, better penetration, but still it'll feel like it's underperforming, especially if you're constantly facing higher tier enemies. And this final package is an absolute grind, because if you do not have this already researched from the other TD line, this final package will cost a total of 80,000 XP. This is including the price of the previous package. So the previous package will be about 20,000, and this final package will be another 60,000. That is a nightmare if you do not have these guns previously researched off the other TD line. So let's take a look at the statistics on this final package. The final engine gets 510 horsepower, giving this thing an absolute terrible power to weight ratio. This tank is really heavy. It's over 60 tons. So that's part of the reason why it goes so slow. The final gun, as I said, it's pretty decent. It's absolutely solid for Tier 8. You will penetrate anything you shoot at Tier 8, pretty much. You have 5.94 rounds a minute. So at base, you would have about a 10-second reload, but that's easily reduced with a crew with Brothers in Arms or even just a gun rammer equipment. So you're looking at less than 10 seconds of a reload speed if you equip this thing out properly. The penetration values, you've got 248 with standard armor-piercing rounds and 297 with APCR, and average alpha of 400 on both of those. The APCR are very, very rarely worth switching to unless you are shooting at higher tier tanks 100%, because it's only a 50 millimeter penetration increase, and it's not worth switching to APCR if you're shooting at tier 8s whatsoever. You only want to be shooting these at higher tier tanks to get the extra silver and XP bonus from damaging higher tier tanks. And even then, 297 penetration, you will still struggle with a lot of tanks, even E75s, but definitely things like VK4502 Bravos. STIs will still be a little bit problematic unless you know exactly where to shoot them. You still have to aim for the weak points on a lot of tier 9 and especially on tier 10 tanks, even when shooting premium APCR. The high explosive rounds, only 60 penetration, pretty poor for high explosive rounds, and only 515 alpha damage. So I rarely carried any HE rounds on this thing. I think only 1 or 2 is about all you need. And honestly, it would simply be for shooting at super thinly armored artillery, or even shooting at something like a Borsig or a Waffenträger 4. That's about it. The overall handling of the gun, 2.29 aim time. Not bad, and the bloom does not get very big when this thing's moving, largely because this thing is so slow. So the overall gun handling is actually quite nice on this tank, but you've got 0.38 accuracy, which it's not good, it's not bad. It's kind of on the, if you ask me, it's kind of on the bad side of average, in my personal opinion. It will troll you at the longer ranges, definitely. I had that happen to me quite a lot. But for the most part, if you use this thing in choke points and you're getting close to your enemies, especially in a tier 8 games where you're top tier, it will serve you just fine. The overall traverse speeds, again, mobility is this thing's greatest weakness. 20 degrees per second hull traverse, 18 degrees per second turret traverse. Not very good traverse rates whatsoever. The turret armor is 203 in the front is what it's rated at, and those are the flat plates right next to the gun mantlet. So anything with 210, 220 penetration, if they know exactly where to shoot you, they can and will penetrate you and damage you every shot. View range is 380, which is fairly poor, especially at tier 8, because there are some heavy tanks that will outspot you. For example, the T32 will outspot you. It has 410 meters of view range, I believe. So that is a serious problem with this tank as well, is that other tanks can outspot you quite easily, and some of them are heavy tanks, which is a little silly. But moving on, we're going to take a look at some of the supplies and equipment that I used on this tank. So let's go ahead and open up supplies first. So the ammo types that I used, I mounted 32 standard AP rounds. Those served me quite well. Like I said, if you're top tier in this tank, those are pretty much all you're going to need. You might want to shoot some APCR at really fast light tanks, especially at 200 to 300 meters minimum, to try and use the heightened shell velocity to help hit that light tank and actually hit your target. I only carried 7 APCR. Like I said, they're not really worth it because they're pretty expensive. 4,800 silver per shell, and it's not a huge increase in the penetration. But they're definitely handy to have for when you really need to put some dents in heavily armored targets, especially tier 9s and tier 10s. That's pretty much the only time that I would suggest using APCR personally, so that you get a little bit of extra XP and silver for damaging those higher tier tanks. And like I said, I hardly carried any high explosive rounds. I only carried 1. And that's pretty much all I needed, because anything else will beat me to artillery, and there's the odd time where I will actually spot a Borsig at roughly the same time that they'll spot me, which, you know, is very unlikely because this thing has a much worse camo rating and worse view range than a Borsig. But for the opportunities that present themselves, and I know where they are, I can simply just load a high explosive and smack them for as high as 650 or even as low as 400 or so. But it's really nice to have for those opportunities when you can have it. But I wouldn't recommend carrying more than that. Consumables, very standard. Nothing that you haven't seen before. Small repair kit, small first aid kit, automatic fire extinguisher. Very easy for this thing to catch fire when it gets shot anywhere in the backside, particularly, especially by artillery. If artillery doesn't flat out kill you, it'll probably just set you on fire anyways, and you could burn out. So the automatic fire extinguisher will definitely help in those respects. Now, for equipment, very, very standard setup. Again, nothing you guys haven't seen before. Common on a lot of the tanks that I play. Large caliber tank gun rammer, enhanced gun lane drive, and coated optics. Exactly the same as I did on the T28 too. Now, part of my struggles with this tank could very well have been because I was quote unquote mounting the wrong equipment. I could have dropped the gun lane drive and the optics and gone with, say, camo net and binocs, and I might have had a better time with this tank, playing it much more passively and playing these vision wars and winning these vision wars against enemy tanks. I might have had a completely different experience with this tank if I did that. I don't know. I'm not really going to chalk up my negative thoughts on this tank to something as simple as, oh, I'm not mounting the right equipment or something silly like that. The optics definitely helped with the vision wars, especially when I was able to get on the front line with this tank, which was hard to do, believe me. The gun lane drive helped with the aim time, obviously, because there's no reason not to stop in this tank to aim in your shots. You can keep moving and snap a shot off, but I mean, there's no reason to continue trying to drive to a piece of cover in this thing when you go 18 kilometers an hour. And the gun rammer, obviously, just to load shells faster. That's basically all it is there. So let's go ahead and open up tanks.gg and take a look at the armor profiles, and I'll show you the gimmicks of this tank. So here we are on tanks.gg looking at the armor profiles. As I said, the front is actually quite well protected. You've got 203 millimeters of armor in the front of the turret as well as in the front plate, and then you're looking at 152 in other parts of the front, such as the turret ring and even the lower plate. So shooting at this thing, if you don't have at least 210, 220 millimeters of penetration, you're going to have a tough time cracking this thing in the front, because the weakest part on this thing is exactly 210 millimeters, and it's these flat parts of armor right next to the gun mantlet. So if you're in a 28 Proto and you want to try and get some cheeky-ass bounces, you could wiggle the turret a little bit, but the turret traverse is so slow that there's really not much point in doing that. It's best to just kind of face your enemies head on. The front plate itself, about 220. At certain angles, you'll get up to 230. The lower plate, don't even bother shooting at it unless you're an extremely low tank and you're looking at it at this kind of angle. And even then, you'll still need premium rounds pretty much, because looking at the lower plate on this thing, it's the same. It's less thick than the upper front plate, but it's a much sharper angle if you're shooting down at this thing. So you're just going to bounce every time. And these bits around the main upper front plate, they kind of slope back and are closer to the turret there. They're even harder to penetrate. I've bounced my own APCR round right off the top of this thing, because that's 330 millimeters of armor. You're not going to penetrate that. The sides of the turret, there are some little cheeky spots right outside the flat piece of armor where it's fairly thin, going up to about 200 millimeters. You can get a nice pen there at a decent angle, but at the outsides of the turret, you're just going to bounce right off because it's just so heavily angled. Now, the rest of this tank, and this is what, in my opinion, heavily kills this tank, absolutely. The side armor, you're looking at 50 millimeters of side armor. In the tracks, they're only adding 20 millimeters of spaced armor, so 70 in the side behind the tracks as well. The back, again, 50 millimeters. This top piece here, it's only 25 millimeters thick. With the sloping, it's 30 millimeters. The sides of the turret, 127 millimeters thick, and anywhere between 150 to 170. So you can get a troll bounce from a really low pen light tank, but for the most part, anything but the front, this thing is easy to damage, easy to kill. Now, I mentioned before that this thing has 10 degrees of gun depression, but there's a serious flaw in that. Straight ahead, this thing only has 6 degrees of gun depression. And that is straight ahead. This is the ideal range that you want your gun to be pointing at an enemy if you want to rely on your armor. The 10 degrees of gun depression don't kick in until you're pointing off to the side. So hill fighting, you would think, would be pretty good for this thing, but A, it takes forever to get up a hill with this thing for starters because it's so slow. And B, you would have to basically show the weakest parts of your tank to even use this gun depression. Let's go back to the 3D model and I'll show you what I mean. So in the front of the tank, if you're trying to ridge fight, you don't really have much gun depression. You've only got the 6 degrees of gun depression, so you're not going to do very good ridge fighting. You can get way cheekier and peek way over, so long as you don't expose this weak-ass underbelly. People will have, especially if you're top tier, people will still have some trouble penetrating you until this lower plate becomes extremely flat, and then they can just shoot you up there and hurt you. So you figure, okay, well, we've got 10 degrees of gun depression off to the side, so let's just use it there. So this would be the angle you're peeking over a hill to use your maximum gun depression. But look at the side armor. You're looking at 70 millimeters, less than 80 millimeters of side armor here. If anybody can see anywhere here, they can just shoot you in the side, hurt you, damage modules, kill your crew, possibly ammo rack you, just absolutely wreck you in this tank. It's insanely frustrating with this tank in particular. But that's basically a look at the gun constraints and the armor profile on the 28 prototype. Simply put, flank this thing. That's all it takes. The overall DPM of the 28 prototype is actually fairly decent, a little less than 2,500. Just with Brothers in Arms, you're breaking 2,500 in the 28 prototype. 2534 DPM total, so that's not bad whatsoever. Let's take a look and compare these hidden stats, terrain resistances, and dispersion values while moving. We'll compare them with another Tier 8 tank destroyer in just a second. Let's just compare it with the previous tank, the T28 first off. So the 25-2, as I mentioned in the previous episode, actually has really good gun handling, and that's one thing that I liked about it. The T28 prototype, not so much. Ignoring the fact that these tanks have very different dispersion values on PC, which is what these are here. Ignoring that fact, the T28 prototype has way worse soft stats in terms of... Excuse me. Sorry, I almost choked there. In terms of some of the terrain resistances and dispersion values. Moving the T20 is a little bit better, and traversing the tank, the T28, is a little bit better in those aspects. But traversing the turret is a fair bit worse, and after firing a shot, your dispersion, your accuracy is going to just go out the window compared to the T25-2. The T25-2 has very consistent, very good overall gun handling in those respects. Now, the terrain resistances, hard terrain resistances, is better than the T25-2. The T25-2 still loses a bit of its maximum possible top speed going over things like pavement and concrete and stuff like that. The T28 prototype, not so much, but it's only going 18 kilometers an hour, so big whoop. It's got the same on medium terrain, so grass and dirt. And on soft terrain, the T28 prototype will slow down from snail pace to slug pace, basically. It goes ridiculously slow. So expect those changes jumping from the T25-2 to the T28 prototype. So let's compare with another Tier 8 tank destroyer. I'm looking for the British one, the Challenger. No, Tier 7. Charioteer. The new British Tier 8, Tier 8 turreted tank destroyer. The T28 prototype has better dispersion values when moving the tank's hull or traversing the tank's hull. But the turret traverse, the Charioteer blows the T28 prototype out of the water, maintaining way better dispersion when traversing the turret. It's the same for after firing or being damaged. And the terrain resistances, not only is the Charioteer way faster, but it has way better terrain resistances to maintain its better top speeds anyways. As you can see here, hard, medium, and soft, much worse on the T28 prototype. So that's basically just a really quick comparison there. It's a lot of these little gimmicky things that made me just dislike this tank. And honestly, I don't think this is a very good tank. If you like this tank, good on you. I'm actually kind of proud of you because I really tried to like this tank, but if you ask me, its weaknesses vastly outweigh its strengths. It just absolutely immensely. But enough babbling here. Let's take a look at the crew and module locations using images off of wotinfo.net. So looking at the first photo here, very, very common. You should be kind of used to this by now. Driver on the left side of the front hull, radio man on the right side behind the machine gun port in the hull. Nothing new there. The driver can get killed, but it's much less likely if you're top tier. If you're facing a lot of tier 9s or tier 10s especially, there's a very good chance these two guys will get killed by really high penetration guns. Left side of the tank, This is where the weaknesses come into play, because you have 50 millimeters of side armor and about 140, 150 in the side of the turret. These guys, your crew can get knocked out very easily, and your modules damaged even easier. You've got ammo rack directly underneath the turret. You've got ammo rack in the back of the turret. You have fuel tanks directly behind the ammo rack. Very easy to hit all of those, especially if you flank this thing. Shooting it in the side of the turret on the left, you'll either hit the gunner, who's more in the front, or the commander, who's a little bit in the back, and you'll severely cripple the already kind of mediocre accuracy on this thing. It'll just go in the toilet if you hit anywhere in that part of the turret and kill one of those crew members. The back of the tank in the hull, between the tracks, you've got the engine. If you really want to cripple a T28 prototype, knock out its engine, because at that point, it's just a sitting duck. He's not going anywhere. Artillery can easily hit him. The right side of the tank, same as before, except on the right side of the turret, you have the loader closer to the back. Him getting hit will severely cripple the decent DPM on this tank. Again, ammo rack in the back of the turret, ammo rack underneath the turret, and fuel tanks behind the ammo rack, still in the hull area. So easy for these modules to get hit. Since this tank has absolutely terrible side armor, easy for those modules to get damaged, easy for you to get set on fire. So, like I said, I did not like this tank. It was very frustrating, and I'm quite biased in that because I simply just don't like slow tanks. But again, I don't think the positives of this tank outweigh the negatives. The biggest thing that really kills this tank, like I said, is its speed. It can't hill climb so that it can use its gun depression and its decent turret armor. And it can't relocate if your team is failing on a flank and they need some support. You basically start a game off, you pick the direction you're going to go, you hit cruise control up, and you don't stop until you come across bad guys, or until you go all the way around the map and see nothing and your team loses or wins. Or you could very well just get flanked by, 4 or 5 light or medium tanks and obliterated in, 10 seconds. That can happen. Because of this thing's slow speed as well, it's insanely vulnerable to artillery. The open top turret plus the 30 millimeters of armor over the engine deck, artillery will absolutely wreck you if it directly hits you. But also 50 millimeters of side armor. If you recall my very first game in this tank, half the damage I took was from a single artillery shell that didn't even hit me. It landed right next to me, and because the armor is so bad on the sides of this thing, the splash damage alone was enough to take off half of my HP. So it's just a very easy tank to kill if you're not stuck facing it head on. If you're stuck facing this thing head on, it can be very difficult to penetrate if you don't have an upgraded Tier 9 tank. Even more than half of the Tier 9 medium tanks in this game will have trouble penetrating the front, unless it's a Leopard prototype or Centurion 7-1 that are using an L7A1 105mm and shoot APCR standard. Everything else will have difficulty penetrating it. Tier 8s will have difficulty penetrating it. It can be a tough nut to crack in the right situations. But like I said, it's a tank of extremes. You'll have really awesome games because everything went just right. People were in really good positions for you to shoot them. You were able to get into the action as quickly as possible. And artillery was either ignoring you or just could not hit you. But, when things go bad in this tank, things go absolutely horrible. I had more zero damage games in this tank than any other tank that I've previously grinded, honestly, because either my team will get obliterated so quickly I can't even get a shot off before I'm surrounded and killed, or my team absolutely steamrolls the opposition so quickly that I am completely left in the dust and I don't get to any of the action. So it's a tank of extremes. I straight up did not like it. Sue me for that, but having no speed absolutely kills potential versatility, and versatility is what I hold in extremely high regard in this game and in any tank, really. But enough about that. Let's get into some gameplay now. Got 2 games lined up here for you. I wanted to share a third one, but I felt it was really unnecessary, as this first game here shows off how easy it actually is to bully low penetration tanks with the pretty good frontal armor profile of this tank. I wound up with a pretty good damage game at this point, and that's a lot easier to do on a map like Pearl River or any of the urban maps, where it's much more corridor shooting and choke point holding. This tank is actually pretty damn good at that. You would be kind of thinking, well, but it has a turret, so it could go out in the open and use its turret to, get shots on things that non-turreted TEDs would not be able to, blah, blah, blah. That's true, but this T28 Prototype actually excels much better in a specific choke point where it can actually utilize its frontal armor. If you recall in the armor profile there, even slightly angled, this thing's frontal armor is 230 effective and better in other areas, so it can be a really tough nut to crack. So right off the bat here, it's only 40 seconds into the game on Pro River here, and I'm not even halfway to my desired location. I was simply just going to go straight up into the middle and take on whatever showed up in the Delta 5, Delta 6 area, basically. Just right up in the middle area, take on whatever was coming that way. I was top tier. I wasn't very top tier, as there were a lot of tier 8s, but as I mentioned before, the vast majority of tier 8s will have an extremely difficult time penetrating the front of this tank. So I knew I was in for a treat, so long as a decent amount of tanks actually went to the middle on the other side, on their team, then I knew I was in for a pretty damn good game. Especially since I only had a Centurion 1 coming to back me up. We didn't have an overwhelming force that was going to come swoop in and just absolutely obliterate everybody super quickly, so I was expecting a pretty decent game. So before I can even get up around the corner, spotted the enemy Tiger. He pulled off a pretty wicked snapshot and actually damaged me there. But the shot from the second Tiger, that is in the platoon with the first one, not so lucky, does not penetrate my frontal profile. I took a really bad shot. I wanted to hit the top right corner that I was able to see earlier, but just a really bad shot on that Tiger there. So, landing a nice shot in the second Tiger in the side of his turret. I'm trying to pull forward and get these guys to shoot at my front armor and protect this Centurion as best as I could, as I knew I wanted to keep him alive and keep him supporting me. Another shot into one of these Tigers. Centurion behind me is just taking pot shots and causing the Tigers to shoot at him, which wasn't what I wanted. But he's playing very smart. He's not, trying to bully me out of the way and be like, get out of my spot or whatever. He is utilizing my armor profile to deflect shots for him as best as he can. Now, I'm trying to pull around this corner, not just to get some shots, but to try and get my front plates sticking out there to see if I can block some shots on this Tiger. But once I knocked out that first Tiger, it was a lot less necessary, and I simply peeked out to line up a second shot on this other Tiger, blowing him out of the game. So, two quite dangerous Tier 7 heavy tanks taken out of the game in the first 3 minutes, and they were actually the more dangerous heavy tanks on the other team as they were platooned, even though they were down a tier. So at this point, I figured that's probably all the damage I'm going to get this game. But I realized that the north side of the flank, where my platoon mate Player TD was in his IS-3, it was probably going to fall, as they still had a few tanks over there, and it was only Player TD and one other person. Player TD's backup, though, did get taken out. So it was just Player TD. I was pinging the teammates to defend the base. All three of their heavy tanks are over there with a medium tank and who knows what else. So I knew that I was actually going to get some damage in. I simply had to get into a position where I could actually shoot them. So I was simply moving along this other pathway from the center of the map to get on top of this ridge that kind of overlooked the base. I would see any enemies that came towards our base from the north spawn coming across the bridge there. But the first thing that comes around the corner is a Centurion 1, who I simply plant a shot into and take him out of the game. 110 comes around the corner. I know he has no chance of penetrating me. He's only got 170, 180 penetration, I believe, so he bounces a shot off my front. I plant one in his side before he can escape, and the Centurion 1 that has been working with me so well this game comes up behind me and finishes them off nice and quickly. So I'm hoping to run into the enemy Lerva or the other heavy tank around this corner here, as I did not see them cross the bridge heading towards our base. It was probably the plan that the Centurion 1 and the 110 were going to do that, so I simply waited for our Centurion 1 to actually pull forward, see if he can spot anything. In the meantime, I didn't want to fall out of position where if they got past us, I would not be able to properly defend the base. But the Centurion 1 spots the enemy Lerva around the corner here. Lerva plants a shot into my side as I was not angled towards him at all, so I responded in kind with a shot into his hull area. Lerva pulls forward, busts my gun, but his turret's turned too far, and I have an easy time penetrating the front of his turret. It's at this point I decide I need to repair my gun. I want it as accurate as possible so I can take out this Lurva before he kills me. I'm a one-shot for the Lurva, but I figure I have time to get in there right before he reloads. Unfortunately, my shot really just donks it, and I thought at this point I was dead, but he donks his shot into my gun one more time, giving me ample time to reload and respond in kind, taking him out of the game. So that leaves just this poor Churchill 7 who can do nothing but simply shoot me in the gun and destroy my gun. I can't fire at this point, but as soon as I'm able to, I just plant a shot in the Churchill 7, and the Centurion 1, who took off most of his HP, is able to finish him off with a nice shot into his turret once more. So not a bad game there. I knew that I got a lot of damage from those Tigers, but I totaled for 4,217 damage, getting a steel wall, a sniper medal, high caliber, over 3,000 XP with ops, and a buttload of silver, but that's largely because of 3 medals. So, like I said, this is a tank of extremes. When things go right, things really go right, as you can see. Over 4,000 damage. Not bad whatsoever. But I simply am chalking that up to the fact that I also got really lucky running into 2 Tiger tanks at the start of a game, as well as having enough time to backtrack and run into several of the remaining enemy tanks and being able to actually engage them in combat and farm a little bit more damage. But enough about that. This second game here on Arctic Region, I'm actually not top tier in this game, as you can see from the team composition. There are some tier 9s, but one of them is artillery on both teams, and the other ones are an E75, an IS-8, and an STI. The one that I was most concerned about, basically just poking holes through my frontal armor, was the IS-8. The E75, I wasn't too sure. It depended if he was fully upgraded or not. I simply assumed he was, so I figured he probably would not have much trouble penetrating me if I wound up running into him. So I'm still platooned with player TD as well as Asmodeus in an Object 416. Me and player TD, we were just grinding out our 8s together this day here, so recorded some pretty decent games to share here with you guys. And Asmodeus playing his Object 416 medium tank. Just been working. We were working the servers this day. It was a pretty good day, but I simply wanted to buckle down and just get this T28 prototype grind over with. I was tired of playing it. I wanted a tank with a moderate resemblance of speed, so I contacted as many of my friends as I could, and I said, look, I'd really like to platoon up because I can't stand playing this thing by myself. So I was able to platoon up with player TD for the majority of a day. We cranked out a crap load of games, him and his IS-3, myself and my T28 prototype, and I basically finished it off. I think it was the final 70,000 XP on a Sunday. I just played pretty much 6 or 7 hours straight. Like I said, the XP requirement for the T30 is a long haul. It's about 170,000 XP for the T30, and if you have not previously gone down the T110E4 tank destroyer line, the other US tank destroyer line, then this tank will be a serious grind because it's 80,000 total XP. It's over 80,000 total XP to upgrade this thing to the final 120mm gun, which personally really makes this tank shine in the environments where it will shine. So the friendly M103 next to player TD and player TD, they started engaging 4 of the enemy heavy tanks. I know one of them is a T-32. Excuse me. And it looks like 2 of them are 2 of their tier 9 tanks as well, as people were requesting fire. And I was able to determine by their gamer tag and who was playing which tank that I knew the E75 was over there as well. There's a Carnarvon over there and the IS-8. So I'm simply just moving into position. I said to player TD, look, dude, I'm just going to pull up into position. I'm probably going to die super quickly because I can't avoid anything. But I'm just going to pull forward and get some shots on these guys. I want some damage in. And right away, I'm getting shot at. 4 or 5 shells fly at me, and 2 of them bounce off. I was really surprised that it took no damage there. Either expecting lots of penetrations on my hull or artillery to just absolutely blow me out of the water here. Artillery could have very easily killed me in this situation here. I didn't really have any good shots on any enemy tanks myself. Trying to penetrate the Carnarvon's turret As I know, right outside the gun mantlet on the Carnarvon is really weak, especially on the top. It's only about 50 millimeters. So I got a really lucky shot on the Carnarvon, pinning him for over 400 damage. And so far, I have not suffered a scratch. And I figured, okay, RNG is smiling on me. One more shot into the Carnarvon's turret. He bounces me. I hit him for just under 400. So I've already done about 800 damage. And the IS-8 fires off a shot that goes over my head. Aimed for a shot on the IS-8, but he disappears, so I aimed for a shot on the E-75. I know I can't hit the E-75 anywhere where I'll penetrate him right now, especially in the front, so I didn't bother with a shot. Friendly artillery knocks out the IS-8. Or, sorry, not the IS-8. What did he kill? I think it was the Carnarvon, but anyways, the IS-8 gets spotted one more time, so I figured I'll go for a Hail Mary on the IS-8. Poorly aimed shot on the tougher armored areas of the IS-8. Just bounces right off. This is where I see a T-32 going for a Hail Mary on the T-32. I know the T-32 pretty much has the best turret armor in the entire game, so I was not expecting a miracle there. Player TD charged forward to take out the scout tank below us, so I tried to support him by getting some damage in on the guys who I knew were going to rush him. As you can see, I'm wiggling my hull like crazy in between shots here, and I think that's part of the reason why I was bouncing so many shots this game. It could very well be that this E-75 was not fully upgraded. The Panther II maybe as well. Who knows? But the M12 hit me for half of my HP. Didn't even directly hit me with a shot there. It still took off half of my HP. Nice shot on the turret side of the E-75. A second shot on the turret side of the E-75. Still bouncing shots from the T-32, which I know can't pen me from the front anyways. But the Panther II is having a bitch of a time penetrating me for some reason as well. Snapped a really clutch shot on the Panther II. I was not expecting to hit him in the side armor there as he was trying to retreat. But I knew at this stage we had the upper hand as we took out two of their top tier heavy tanks. Basically the rest of their team is dead. Our team was able to secure the entire other flank. So that leaves just this T-32 and this Panther II. I'm not going to lie, folks. I feel like I got really lucky this game. I'm sure wiggling the hull definitely helped causing some of those bounces, but I felt like I kind of cheated the other guys out. I don't think the E-75 was fully upgraded, and it's entirely possible the IS-8 wasn't either. The Carnarvon would have had a heck of a time penetrating me, especially from that far away at these angles. The T-32, no chance in hell. Only about 180 penetration on the T-32, even with the top gun. So I knew he was not going to penetrate me whatsoever. Had they loaded up premium rounds, though, I would have died extremely quickly. So I'm literally just chalking this up to luck. I'm lucky they didn't load premium rounds. I'm lucky artillery didn't absolutely smash me when I was spotted, and I was literally sitting in one spot for the majority of this game. But what can you do? Sometimes that happens. Like I said, this is a tank of extremes. When it works, it really works. 2,115 damage dealt. Got a cool medal there. Sorry, I almost said Spartan. Cool medal there. Cool-headed medal for bouncing 10 shots. An ace tanker badge for inflicting a lot of damage on higher tier tanks. Getting over 2,200 XP for that game. Pretty good XP bonus for damaging higher tier tanks, especially knocking out the enemy IS-8 would have given me a decent XP bonus there. And player TD also having a pretty decent game. Asmodeus, not sure what happened there, but he got taken out pretty quickly, unfortunately. Anyways, that's a pair of games in the T28 Prototype, as well as an in-depth look at the armor profile and the overall stats of this tank. Like I said, guys, it's a tank of extremes. I can't say that enough. You'll either love this tank or you'll hate this tank. It's as simple as that. If you're like me and you're not a fan of slow tanks, this tank will be absolutely aggravating. Even worse if you have not gone down the T110E4 US tank destroyer line and fully upgraded the T28, because that top gun on this tank costs at least 60,000 XP, so it's about 80,000 total XP just to get this thing fully upgraded, and then it's another 170,000 just to get to the T30. So it can be a serious long haul, and it can be a serious struggle. As I said, I don't think this tank is a very good tank. It's just so slow. It has horrible side armor. It's a massive artillery magnet, and the armor is very unreliable at best there. There's some games where you just bounce everything under the sun, as I showed you on Arctic region, and there's other games where everybody just hits you exactly where they need to, and they kill you super quickly. So what can you do? That should be it for Episode 4 here in the Road to the T110E4. This has been Mobius Y. As always, thank you very much for watching. I hope to see you in the next episode covering the Tier 9 T30 tank destroyer. In the meantime, you guys have a good night and happy tanking.